is Charlene Margot, founder of nonprofit The Parent Venture. Welcome, Susie Wise.
Well, hello, thank you. And thank you to all of you that are joining tonight in the midst of busy back to school time and an incredible heat wave. I'm amazed that anybody is logging on to a webinar tonight, and I'm grateful for your time and your attention as well as your participation. I'm also grateful for the work that you do as parents. Parenting in this day and age, in any age, is such important work. And I'm so grateful that you choose to do that work and that you're joining in to think together about how, as parents and potentially as educators, thinking about the education and learning of our children, that we can think really deeply about what the role of belonging is. So that's going to be what I'm talking about. As Charlene said, I'll throw out a few prompts and would love to, as we get going, hear from you in chat about those. But first, I thought I'd say a few words just about my background and where I came from. I'm here with you, in your living room, in your laptop, in your office, wherever you are. If you're watching this later on video, just thought I'd give a little bit of background, and then I'll share where the framework of design for belonging came from and offer a few prompts for us to think about. So I am going to go ahead and steal with love a part of your screen. And here we go. So I was somebody who thought I was meant to go to Washington. I had been part of politics as a young person. And as I exited college, I had the idea that I was going to Washington. I, in fact, had a job to go do it, to be a junior legislative assistant. And at the last minute, I thought, I don't know, maybe not that. I moved to the Bay Area and started working in different educational contexts. I started working in HIV and AIDS education, and that led me to the Exploratorium. For some of you that are old school, this is where the Exploratorium used to be before it moved to Pier 15. So I got my start in education at the Exploratorium, and I moved from there into what we called at the time edutainment. We likely now call it ed tech. But my work was thinking about how to turn some of the classics of early readers and early math into CD-ROM adventure games. That really got me thinking about how people learn. I went from there to the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, where I worked more broadly thinking about general audiences. How could we learn about and start to understand what artists are trying to do, particularly modern and contemporary artists, when they make works like a urinal in the case of Duchamp or an all-white painting in the case of Rauschenberg. These were difficult concepts to share with folks, and we played around with lots of ways that technology could assist in sharing the voice of the artist and sharing the questions of the visitors. By this point, I was 10 years out of college and been doing things that were about learning, but that hadn't been my background, because if you recall, I was supposed to be in politics. So that's what led me to Stanford and led me to start to experience life on the peninsula as well. There's where I did my doctorate in learning sciences and technology design. While I was a student, I created what we now know as the K-12 lab at the D.school. This was an effort to think about what the mindsets and modes and ways of working of designers coming out of the long history of product design at Stanford, what those mindsets could mean in K-12 education. Really, what could they look like for students and teachers? And what we found was that teachers and school leaders were particularly moved to embrace the reconnection to their creativity and thinking about how they could continue to change and improve their schools. We did all kinds of programs, from maker education to entrepreneurship to thinking about design challenges in schools and nationally. And part of that work started working much more explicitly with the role of design in supporting more equitable education. We started thinking about what it would mean to use design to support students furthest from opportunity. In a program called School Retool, we work nationally with education leaders, school principals, assistant principals, counselors, to really think about the mindsets of design and how they could be used to change school environments. This work led me to focus on belonging. I discovered through a mentor of mine at the National Equity Project, Victor Carey, I discovered the work of John Powell. He's at Cal. As a Stanford person, I know I'm not supposed to mention Cal, but Cal hosts the Othering and Belonging Institute. And that institute helps us to think about othering and belonging. And what I found in starting to use this framework of othering and belonging is that educators really responded to it. That in starting to think about belonging, we remembered what we were trying to do when we said we are working on diversity, equity, and inclusion. What we were trying to do is help the feeling of belonging emerge for more people more of the time. So it felt really powerful. The question then becomes, can you design belonging? And my answer is yes and no. And the reason it's no is because belonging is a feeling, and you can't design a feeling. You can only design for it to emerge. So the book is designed for belonging, and it's a reminder to us that belonging is the feeling that we want to support to emerge for more people more of the time without causing othering, and that we can use design by opening up the toolkit of design to create that. So this is what we're talking about tonight. I want to invite you to take a moment and think about where you feel belonging. And concretely, I'm actually going to invite us to do a very short meditation, a body scan. You might be familiar with it. Don't worry, we're not going too far out here. This will be very constrained, but the invitation, wherever you are, if you're sitting, standing, not if you're driving a car, to close your eyes and feel into where you are. If you're in a chair, feel where you are, where your bottom is touching the chair. Feel where your feet might be on the ground. You can uncross your legs and really feel the ground. Know that beyond the floor, the earth is supporting you. So feel into that. Just take a moment to feel grounded in this moment. Again, if you're not driving a car, I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, feel your body, and I'll start the body scan. The invitation with this body scan is, as I mentioned different parts of your body, and you may have your eyes closed and you're starting to feel into those parts of your body, let yourself notice which of them feel like there's some belonging there. They might conjure a memory or a story as you pass them by. So here we go, feet on the ground, continuing to breathe deeply. I invite you to feel into your feet and your ankles, moving up your leg, get to your knee, along your thighs, front and back. You're into your groins and your bum, in the chair, feeling up into the central cavity of your body, feeling into your lungs, taking in another calming, affirming breath. You are here. In this moment, you belong right here. Keep breathing up into your throat, around your shoulders, down your arms, into your elbows, fingers. You can go back up to your arms, maybe roll your shoulders, feel your back body, your heart. Which of these places is calling out to you with a story? Up into your throat and around your head, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, the back of your head, your ears. Which of these body parts has a story to tell you about a time when you felt belonging? And as we prepare to come out, I just invite you to take one more grounding breath, breathing in, breathing out, being in this moment. And I'll stop share for a moment and invite you in the chat if you would like, and only if you would like, feel free to share a place where you noticed belonging arise for you. I did this recently with some colleagues, and somebody mentioned that when we passed by the hips, his hips called out to him to remind him of a time that he'd been backpacking and the kind of camaraderie on the trail he felt as a moment of belonging, and he felt it in his hips right then. Somebody else mentioned that when we passed by her throat, it reminded her of a time she was in a choir where she felt an incredible sense of belonging and collaboration and the joining together of voices that still to that day meant to her belonging. So I'm curious, and people may not be used to using chat in this event, but I would love for you to share in the chat. Are there any body parts that are popping up for you? Any thoughts or stories to share? Ah, the hands for communication and collaboration. Yeah. What a symbol, right? The joining together of hands, the shaking of hands, the working together with our hands, breaking bread together potentially with our hands. Those are all really interesting. The reason I like for us to think about our bodies and where we actually feel belonging is because that's the thing. We talk about belonging as a sense of belonging. It's an additional sense, it's embodied, and it's important if we're going to work towards helping there to be more belonging in our worlds and for our children, that we recognize it, that it lives in our bodies. So I like to start there and invite you in other times to think about where belonging is in your body. Sometimes when we talk about belonging, what arises as a memory is a time when we didn't so much feel it. And this is a photograph of me. I'm 12 years old. I'm at my mother's second wedding. So her wedding to my stepfather, who at this moment in time, I can say I dearly love and I'm so grateful to have in my life. But in that moment, in the photograph that I'm showing you, that wasn't the case. And this moment, when I started to work on belonging and remember some times of not belonging, because again, those arise when you start to work on belonging, and that's important because that's instructive. This was a memory that came up, and I was grateful that my mom helped me find this photograph. I might look just like an awkward 12-year-old, but in fact, I really felt deeply uncomfortable. This was a place I did not know. There were rituals I didn't understand, and I wasn't even really sure if I was invited to be a part of this event. Those are some of the kinds of feelings that we have when we experience not belonging. And you may find, as you think about the frame of belonging, that those come up for you. I invite you to take care of yourself too, and remember that in the context of right now, that's not something that you need to go deeply into, a feeling of not belonging, but it may arise. I do invite you, and now it looks like now we have chat. Maybe you could share in chat a time, and you can also go back to a place in your body if you would like, a time when or where you felt belonging. Or maybe it's a memory of a time when you didn't so much. It's interesting, I think, to think about what arises for you when you think about a place of belonging. So if the chat is enabled now, let's see if we can get a little bit of a chat flow for just a moment. Are people able to share in the chat? I feel belonging in my workplace. Okay, and this is working great. At summer camp in middle school, a classic and amazing time at home, when you started my college, right? There often belonging comes in or doesn't show up at particular junctures. Can you find your place to be authentically yourself? That's what we're talking about when we're talking about belonging. Playing with my kids, play is such a beautiful place of belonging. At home with your husband and the kids in the kitchen. Kitchen, also an incredible place of belonging often, right? If you're so lucky for it to be. Walking along the beach, yes, places in nature often come up as belonging kind of to a greater world. Really interesting. And thank you for sharing, and feel free to keep sharing if you would like. Another tool that I like to introduce, in addition to the scanning your body for thinking about the feeling of belonging, is a simple journey map. This is a classic tool of design where you think about, and you can use this in any kind of time frame. So perhaps it's when you started your job, or when you moved to a new house or neighborhood or place of that you were living. Any kind of time frame you want to think about, but get specific about what the time frame is. That is your x-axis, and then the y-axis is marking periods of feeling a lot of belonging or not so much belonging. This can be really interesting. This is a tool you can use for yourself to do some understanding about when and where you have felt belonging. It's also a tool you can use in context with others, whether that's a student group, whether that's a group of parents working together on a particular project, working to improve a school environment or shift a school environment. This is a useful tool because you can get to some really specific stories to dig into belonging and what it feels like. So that's the first piece of design for belonging, is feeling it. And again, lots of methods and ways to approach that. It's about you and your body. It's about you and your experience. And it's also then about reaching out and understanding how others feel and don't feel belonging when and where. The next piece of work, which we'll dig into, is seeing belonging. What are the experiential moments of belonging? I'll share those. And then shaping belonging is the expanding how we think about the role of design. So seeing belonging, here's a range, and these are visuals from the book. So shouting out Rose Jaffe, the illustrator. The invitation and entering, these are classic moments of belonging. Often when we think about trying to improve feelings of inclusion or belonging, we think about inviting new people in. The important piece there is to go a little bit further and understand, if we've invited new folks in, a wider range of folks into a context, what does it actually feel like when they enter? And to design for that moment, as well as the moment of full participation. What does that look like? What is called for in a moment of participation? I also call out code switching. This is in some cases a subtle moment, in some cases a very bold moment, but looking for when and where different individuals or groups are code switching can often be a signal to what belonging is looking and feeling like in your context. Contributing. When I originally started experimenting with talking about these moments, I didn't have contributing on the map. And the conversations that I was having as I was doing those journey maps with people, I really started to recognize that the moment of contribution, and I don't mean monetarily, right? I mean the full embodied showing up and contributing in whatever way. It could be monetarily, it could be bringing food to something. It could be showing up and sharing your skills or talents with the group. That can be a really powerful moment of belonging. The flow, when an organization, a group, a team, a school group is in flow, that's usually highly correlated with a strong sense of belonging. And it can be a moment that might be hard for others to enter. So there's something to pay attention to there. As we go further into the work of understanding moments of belonging, repair may be necessary. If you're inquiring of friends, colleagues, schoolmates, other folks that you're building community with about belonging, you may uncover some moments that actually need repair. This is an important part of the work and is something that any group needs to wrestle with. Dissent, I call out as this notion of recognizing that in some ways, the measure of belonging in any group context can be the offering of critical feedback. How do we offer critical feedback? That actually, the willingness to offer feedback, positive or negative or in between, is often a measure of how much belonging there is. Because if we just reject the group, don't feel like we belong, we're not even going to take that step to offer feedback. So that move of dissent, of sharing critical feedback, becomes really important. And then diverging and exiting. From a design perspective, we know that we're not all a part of every group forever. And so designing for, thinking about, feeling into what it feels like to leave as well as to enter helps us go full circle on this way of thinking about design for belonging. As we shift from those moments, and those moments are offered to you as things to concretely look at, we shift into thinking about how to use our design tools to shape belonging. And here, and I've said this in lots of conversations that I've been having since the book came out, so apologies if this is repetitive, but we often, in so many contexts, we think of email as our number one tool. We've got a new idea, so we want to email the group about it. And email is great. We wouldn't be here if email didn't exist. But my work as a designer and a design educator is to remind us that there's so many other tools that we have in our toolkit when we're thinking about design for belonging. So space, role, ritual, events, groupings, how people come together, even things like clothing, food, and importantly, schedules and rhythms. Sometimes we think of the way we use time or the way we use space as fixed because it's always been this way. But in fact, these are all malleable things that we can design with, we can actually use to shape belonging. So a couple examples here when thinking about space. This is a story of friend and colleague, Doug Dietz. He is an innovator and a designer, recently retired from GE Healthcare, pretty famous in the world of healthcare for the industrial design of MRI machines. As he was digging into a more human-centered way to understand his work, he started to recognize the extreme alienation that young children had around MRI machines. And he was really struck by that and moved to do something different. So he spent time doing design research, building empathy, deeply collaborating with children and people that loved and cared for children, preschool teachers, pediatricians, parents, like some of you, and thought about how could we really attend to the needs of young children who are quite sick? Because of course, you know, we don't take a child to get an MRI machine unless we're in to spend time in an MRI machine unless we're in an extreme situation and really concerned about their health and well-being. So as he dug into that, he started to recognize what it's like for young children with serious illness, the kinds of things that they don't get to experience, that their friends, brothers, sisters, siblings get to experience. And he focused on bringing back adventure to critically ill children. And this is what he ended up creating. This is the adventure series of MRI machines, the Cozy Camp and the Pirates Adventure. These are the same machines, but created in spaces that hold a story that young people can relate to in a totally different way. You have a reason to hold still if you're in the Cozy Camp because you just might see the fireflies. And this series has been incredibly successful. It's reduced the load on the technicians that work in these rooms, and it's reduced the amount of anesthesia that children have had to have when getting MRIs in contexts where they have the adventure series, from something over 90% to something under 10%. So pretty important gains in terms of healthcare. But we're talking about belonging and space as a lever to shape belonging. And so I share this story in this context as a story about how space helps us know that we're a part of something. Filling a space with stories of different kinds can be a really powerful way to think about designing for belonging. On to two more stories. Thinking about roles. This is one of the levers of design, one of the ways to shape belonging that I love to think about. And this is a story from education at an organization called the Future Project, that instead of having guidance counselors, in addition to having guidance counselors in schools, offered a new role of dream director. And dream director is really about belonging, because a dream director asks every young person, what is your dream? And can we build the story? Can we build the tools and the pathway to help you get to that dream? The dream director as an innovative role that fundamentally supports belonging for young people. And last example on thinking about how to use these levers of design towards design for belonging is ritual. Some of your schools may have Playworks. Playworks is an incredible nonprofit that recently celebrated its 25th anniversary of bringing healthy play to schools and other learning environments. And this photograph here is obviously of some young people, and you can probably tell that they're playing Rochambeau. On a Playworks playground, most conflicts can actually be solved with the ritual of Rochambeau. Can't decide what game to play, might be escalating, Rochambeau. And the person who wins the Rochambeau gets to pick the game. Don't know who got to the line in first, Rochambeau. This is a kind of ritual, a new ritual that builds community and helps kids to belong, because it helps them to get along on the playground. So I love that example, and I love Playworks. As we turn the corner and get ready to hear some of your questions and your thoughts, I just want to ask us again this bigger question of, why does design for belonging matter? And there are a few important things, particularly germane to schools and school environments and learning environments of all kinds. Belonging is fundamental to who we can be as a learner. If we don't feel like we belong, we can't take on a learner identity. And if we don't have a learner identity, we can't access the resources of our school. So belonging is fundamental to learning in school and all kinds of learning environments. So the work to do is to create all the different designs we can to support an I belong to this learning community kind of a mindset. If you feel you belong, you can persevere when things are hard. And learning is hard. So that ability to belong and that helps you persevere becomes fundamental. It also matters for work. Many of you are working professionals, so I wanted to throw this out, right? We know in study after study, since this is pre-pandemic, but the other study is post-pandemic, and there's much more research coming out, that belonging is actually one of the fundamental drivers of our ability to participate and fully contribute at work. 51% of, and this is 2021, so in pandemic, 51% of workers cited not feeling a sense of belonging at work as a top reason for quitting their jobs. Whether we call it the Great Resignation or the Great Reflection or quiet quitting, we know there's so much turmoil in the working world right now. Belonging is one of the critical things to build in order to support more belonging. And belonging also matters to not repeat the horrors of our collective past. Some of the worst of humanity has come from extreme othering, and building belonging is the powerful antidote to that. It also matters, it deeply matters to build the just and equitable world we want to inhabit moving forward. This is not about looking backwards, this is about looking forwards. And lastly, a quote. This is from John Powell, who I mentioned, who has his framework around othering and belonging. He says, belonging means more than just being seen. Belonging entails having a meaningful voice and the opportunity to participate in the design of social and cultural structures. Belonging means having the right to contribute to and make demands on society and political institutions. It's a fundamental human need, and we need to support it to grow in all of our environments. I'm excited to get to talk about it with you. Before we turn to the Q&A, and I think you can be populating things in the Q&A. I know the team will be mining those and offering up some of your questions. These folks here on the screen are some of the host heroes, as I call them, of belonging. As a designer, I pull in resources from lots of different places. So this group is artists and filmmakers and educators, as well as researchers who think about belonging. And I wanted to just offer you this prompt. I would love to hear any responses you have to it in the chat before we turn to Q&A. And I also, like the emotional journey map and the body scan, I also offer this as an offering that you could use in groups that you're a part of. So the first is belonging in my school community is like blank because blank. I know I belong in my school community because blank. So let's just take a moment and see if anybody could offer responses to these in the chat. I'll keep them on the screen, but feel free to populate the chat if anything is coming to you. And then we will move into Q&A. Yeah, anybody, and we will be posting links. I think that Bev is on that. There's designforbelonging.com is a website with free resources. And as you know, there is the book. And the book is kind of a scrappy tool. I'm going to go ahead and stop share just so you can see me for a second. The book itself is a very scrappy tool. The images that I've shared with you, like the levers of design, actually exist as foldouts that are pretty fun. You can use those with teams, with colleagues, with teachers, with students. So a lot of the different tools that I mentioned are in here. And this is not an event to sell books, but just to say, you know, there is a book.
Well, thank you so much, Susie, for all of that wonder. Oh, here's a couple of comments coming in. Oh, that's another question. Again, Susie's book, I just love, and I really want to recommend it. And for the person who asked about resources, the back section of the book is filled full of readings and researchers and resources and all the people that she mentions in this book, many of whom are in the Bay Area. So lots of things that we can look to and look at for inspiration. So Susie, we've got some good questions coming in, but let me start by asking you, in your book, you say that belonging is the thing that matters most. What brought you to that understanding and to writing this book?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I came to writing the book. I mentioned kind of a piece of the story, but I'll say that I was working with a lot of educators. And as we were turning towards thinking about equity challenges in schools, what I was noticing was a kind of technical response to working on equity challenges. And what I found when I used the prompts around belonging is it fundamentally shifted the conversation. People were more able to think not just about numbers or statistics or where things were in terms of their enrollment or their discipline policies, but actually what did belonging feel like to them? And that allowed them to say, oh, wow, there are some groups in my school that get to feel belonging all the time. And there are some subgroups in my school that don't feel it very much. And how important it is then they kind of experienced a new motivation to say, oh, belonging, that's what we're working on. That connection to it is a feeling. And it's kind of why I harp on the feeling belonging, because I think it helps us crack into our motivation to work on the equity challenges in our school. So that was a really big motivation to me. And what I saw as I experimented was that educators were similarly moved. It really helped people to get going. And I found that with the book as well, that thinking about belonging really helps a wide range of people start to think about what is and isn't working. And then the other side of it, I'm a designer out of the design school. My whole approach to design is to do small, scrappy experiments that get us moving and see if change is possible, because that builds our motivation to create change. And so the design piece is to say, you don't have to spend years planning how to build belonging. You could try some different moves to make it happen. You could try shifting the space. You could try a new invitation. Try a new invitation to a traditional event with a new invitation and see who shows up. Is it only the same people, or did you succeed in attracting some folks that you were hoping to bring in? And if you did attract some more folks, how can you take the next steps on those moments of belonging and help them actually contribute? Because we know once people feel like they're a contributing member of a community, that's a real measure of belonging, and they'll stay part of the community. So I think getting small and scrappy, being willing to try things and learn from them are some of the ways that design helps us work towards belonging.
Thank you, Susie. That makes sense. So first question is right in line with this. A parent asks, what are some best models to design for belonging for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities in an elementary school setting? Again, that's the best way to help bring those kids in and make them feel like they belong.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful question. And I'll say that is like not specifically my specialty. Again, as a designer, so probably parents thinking about those kids have a lot more ideas of what would really work. From my perspective, what's important is to try a number of different things and see what actually feels good, both to the child that has special needs and to the broader group. Bringing in the partnership of educators to help support that is, of course, absolutely critical. I think we're at a really interesting moment kind of in our cultural history that we're able to be much more attentive to students with different kinds of abilities, that we think more broadly about neurodiversity, for instance. We think a lot about what is every person's ability, because belonging is actually getting to show up and share what you have to offer. And there may be contexts where the rest of the community needs help to understand how to appropriately appreciate what you're bringing. Then that's the work to do, right? If a child with particular needs is able to be supportive, to show up and share what they want to share, and it's not landing in community in a way that feels good to everybody, then the work is supporting, right, the rest of folks to really ensure that they're taking up those needs and learning how to respond appropriately.
Absolutely. And you mentioned in the book, Dr. Wise, about the magical rainbow playgrounds.
Bridge.
A bridge,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. And I think that's a great example of trying to say that, oh, we're working with a researcher who talks about radical inclusion. it's good for all kids to see that all kids can be included, right?
Yeah. And that's what you find and if nobody's been to Magical Bridge Playground, it's an incredible playground. And it absolutely is an embodiment of that notion that the range of experience that that playground offers, which are in fact accessible on lots of different dimensions, for both intellectual and physical abilities of wide ranges, that it actually turns into, I mean, it's right that magical is in its name. There's so much attention to that range of experiences that you see that folks of all kinds of abilities are able to play there in a way that doesn't feel as true on traditional playgrounds, not just for students with special abilities, but actually for everyone.
Absolutely. So here's a great question, Susie. Writer asks, please comment on the paradigm of allyship versus belonging. Often the concept of allyship is a cooptation device that strips minoritized groups of their own culture.
Great.
Allyship versus belonging.
Yeah. So super great question. And you do see that. And of course, all these frames, right, can be used for good or for ill. And so we can have the overuse of allyship. I will say that I feel like my fear around belonging is that it becomes a kind of vanilla version and we never get to the hard work of really ensuring that we're getting to equity, because that is still the goal. Belonging is the way that we want it to feel, but equity is a goal. And so my concern around belonging would be that it becomes kind of nice and pretty and feels like it's inviting more people to parties, and that we're not actually doing the hard work. It's part of the reason why I wanted to call out those moments like dissent and like repair to remind us that it's not just invitation and make things feel welcoming. Those things really matter, because when we're new in an environment, we're extra cueing to whether or not we're getting the signals that we can belong. So those do matter. But I want to raise up some of the things that might, in white supremacist dominant culture, be more uncomfortable thinking about dissent and the critical importance of repair. You can't have belonging without those. So that's kind of how I think about that conundrum.
I think that is great. And here's a question that I love, because it's somebody who's trying to make changes based on some of your suggestions. Here we go. Writer asks, I am a newly elected leader in my school community. In much of our outreach, we say things like, join us for a coffee, a school barbecue, a PTA meeting, whatever, which upon reflection after reading the book feels like it could potentially other those who don't see themselves as part of us. Do you have suggestions for how we might reword that to be more inclusive? This is a real problem at schools.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I'm just trying to get a read on it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it feels like you're right. It's Katie. I think it feels like you're really onto it. Then maybe us is not the frame that you want to use, right? So please come. You are invited. You are welcome. You are, request, your presence is requested. We are seeking to engage everyone, right? Lots of language that could shift that. And that's where when I talk about that, I also want to think about how we can be kind of experimental. And I use that in air quotes. How can we be kind of small and scrappy and try some things out? Test your invitation. Offer it to somebody who you know hasn't been to an event. You're being vulnerable to share a draft of an invitation and get some honest feedback from somebody goes so far in actually inviting someone to really be in relationship with you, because you've shown that you're vulnerable and you're trying to do work that is more inclusive, more encompassing. That can be really powerful.
I think that is great advice. And Katie, I hope you try it. I'm going to too. Here's another question that is on the minds of many of the parents with us tonight, Susie. what are your recommendations for parents who feel that their child is marginalized in their school community?
Yeah. And I've been thinking about that question all day. And again, I want to start with so many layers to that. A very important layer is ensuring that your child is safe, that your child who is experiencing feelings of marginalization has what they need to recover from experiences. So that's one piece of let's be sure that we're really attending to that. If they're, and I don't know what level of harm or alienation we're talking about or marginalization we're talking about. So that's one piece. Attend to the pain, I think is really important. And then the other piece is to raise up to, whether it's teacher, administrator, counselor, to raise up to anybody who is attending to the climate and culture, as we sometimes talk about, of a school environment, to do that work, to raise up and not be afraid to say, it seems like this is happening. Even something, and then dig into it. Likely your child is not the only child who's experiencing something like that. Likely there are some structural things that could be addressed, a wide range of them. And again, that's where you need to be where hopefully educators in that context are actually willing to be experimental and try some different things and see what can work. I think the powerful piece about reminding folks that we are seeking to build belonging for everyone is to look closely at what is and isn't working. So even earlier on when I was chatting about that, the emotional journey map that I mentioned, right? Let's not make this just about your child, but could we do some emotional journey maps and understand when and where everybody is having some highs and lows, because there may be more going on than just what your child is experiencing as well. And we want to be able to collect that kind of real human kind of qualitative design data, again, in air quotes, to let us know what's happening. Those stories really matter. And we want to have contexts where it's safe to share them, both for children and for adults. And then that we can use those stories to understand what are some of the deeper patterns to attend to. And then once we understand, wow, it's this particular moment of transition, or it's this particular moment, in a subject matter, or it's this particular engagement with particular adults, right? Then we can get to some specificity and see if we can lift up and dig into how do we actually fix it. So there isn't an easy answer other than to say it's worth paying attention to, of course. And so just want to reaffirm that, and attending to your child is, job one. And then being able to think about in the context of school, is there a bigger problem to attend to? And what kinds of design levers can we play with to try and alleviate it? Because it may take creativity. And that's where we want to open up. How do we use, are there new rules? Can space be used differently? Are there new groupings? That's a really important, right, design lever to play with in terms of addressing potential harms. And then that focus again on repair. How do we repair for harm?
Absolutely. So I want to add this comment from Elena, who is a community leader in special education and inclusion. She notes, it's very important to bring the most marginalized individuals into our community. A lot of times the design for neurodivergent people is left out or is an afterthought.
Yeah. I agree, right? And that's part of this work, is thinking about really who is in our community and where are their voices showing up or not. And the really active and attentive work then to seek out what the experiences are of people that are on the margins. Too often we design for the middle, which actually leaves out so many people. And we have, in fact, really wide-ranging experiences of belonging. And getting to talk about those and share those will enrich the kinds of conversations we can have. And that will then enrich the kinds of things that we can design to be supportive.
That's right. And I was just thinking, we often say everyone's voices need to be heard, but for a child who is nonverbal, we need to find other ways that they be heard. I mean, for example, Caminar, who's a wonderful organization here in San Mateo County,
Yeah.
their big fundraising event in Redwood City is bringing Marley Matten. So it's the first time that there will be a keynote speaker who's deaf. And I think that's a wonderful way to include.
Yeah. That just you're saying that too. I mean, storytelling is another powerful tool that we often underutilize. It's deeply human and it's deeply connected to belonging. And so the ways in which we can tell more stories about more folks, the better. And that's a great place for creativity too. How can we use our space to show the wide range of students that are actually in our building or in our classroom? How can we use the channels that we have among parents to tell stories of the wide range of folks? And that's across lots of different spectra. I think in the peninsula in this day and age, also thinking about the wide range of socioeconomic experiences of, let's call it economic experiences, becomes really important. So there are so many ways, unfortunately, where we marginalize an other. And this work of belonging is to say, how do we do more bridging and storytelling and making visible, or in the words of Brian Stevenson, truth telling, becomes really important.
Absolutely. There's some really great stuff happening in the chat. Dana says here, our school curriculum needs to be a magical playground so that everyone is engaged no matter their ability. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. Susie, we have time for one more question, and I'm going to give you time for the last word. I don't know if this is something that the D-School is doing or has done, but it's a good question. Nancy asked, what data other than test scores in the California Healthy Kids Survey can schools or teachers collect to see if a sense of belonging has increased after we've implemented the toolkit?
Yeah, great question. I'm not familiar with any belonging data that is being kind of universally captured. I'm aware of different contexts where belonging is being looked at, in particular classrooms or in particular schools. So I don't know, like for the state of California, I don't think it is. And it's something that definitely can and should be put on the agenda, because we know that the things that we measure are the things that we work towards. The country of New Zealand has belonging as one of their measures that they're looking at. The city of Columbus, Ohio is looking at belonging across all of its citizens. So it's not crazy hard to imagine doing it. But I'm not familiar with school contexts where they're precisely doing that, except for in research contexts. Okay. Which doesn't mean that you can't do it. And then, as I've been sharing, I'm also really a fan of using design tools, which can be person-to-person conversation tools, to understand how high belonging is or not, and when and where it's felt. Because then we have local data that's really useful for design and redesign of our school environments.
Well, and there's so many examples in your book of things that a teacher could use in the classroom, whether it is making a journey map or figuring out who their, what do you call them, design heroes are. That there's just lots of things that could happen in the classroom that I think kids would love and appreciate of any age.
Yeah. And Gloria points out, and thank you, Gloria, I wasn't thinking of that, but you're right. Again, because there are lots of folks that are looking at the Student Experience Research Network is essentially a group of researchers that are focused on belonging at lots of levels of classrooms. So definitely there are research tools out there, and I love you bringing up the Youth Truth tools. It's great.
Well, we have come to the end of our hour together here at Susie Wise, and it has been wonderful. And everybody, I love all your comments and questions and participation. So much great stuff. We're going to save the chat and get back to everyone about it. So interesting. But Susie, we love to end our programs by asking our presenters, what gives you hope? And as somebody who is in the design world, what gives you hope today?
Oh, thank you. What gives me hope? Well, I'm hopeful. I've really been seeing a lot of people taking up belonging as a felt goal to build in more places for more folks. So I do feel really hopeful that the shift from the technical to the relational, which I think belonging embodies, is really powerful for folks. So I'm very hopeful, and I love whenever I see the small scrappy experiments that are showing up. So I've been hearing from educators and parents across the country kind of in this back to school season, sending me pictures of the opening circle that they did, or the exercise that they did where people told the story of their belonging over the summer, etc. So I love the kind of activity and kind of groundswell around some of this work. So I am hopeful.
I love that small and scrappy. You know, I started this program, the Parent Education Series, 17 years ago because parents didn't have a voice. And it was my goal. I had taught young children and I knew how important parents were. And 120,000 people later, here we are. But Susie, it has been wonderful.
Congratulations.
Dr. Wise, thank you for joining us today. Thank you everybody for being with us. Take care. Get Design for Belonging. Go practice it in your own lives with your own families and your own schools. And again, thank you, everybody. Good evening.